Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Academy. I'm Graham Richmond, and I'm with Alex Brown for this lesson on essays, things to avoid. So I don't know why, but I have a lot of fun, Alex, with the ones that are kind of like what not to do. It's almost easier sometimes to identify stuff that just doesn't work. So let's start with jargon, because we've talked about it before. In data forms and resumes, but so same rules apply here. What if I explain what the jargon means, or is that not a...
Any which way you can avoid jargon is always going to be a good thing.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
So if you've got to write an essay with then footnotes to explain what you've written, that's probably not a good approach.
Yeah, agreed. And actually footnotes would be a no-no, I feel like you don't want, So, okay, so no jargon in your essays. What about quotes? I know when I read files, I would see, people would start out an essay and there'd be a quote from, John F. Kennedy or Gandhi or Martin Luther King. Or how did you feel when you saw that kind of stuff reading files?
Did it make you sound smart when you read those quotes and be like, wow, that's really super
No,
interesting?
I just had seen them all before and kind of felt like, okay,
I mean, that's the problem. It's hard to come up with a context where using someone else's material, i.e. a quote, is going to be so impactful for your particular essays, because as you said, someone's done it before anyway. And we've heard a lot of these quotes before. It's just not an effective use of very limited space, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Use your words, not someone else's. Yeah. Another one is dialogue. So there is a whole brand of, I would argue there's some admissions consultants out there who even try to convince people when they're working on their essays that it has to be like a page-turner novel, and that, so sort of like think of a challenge essay and someone might dive in with some dialogue. It says, John, we've only got 5 days left to get this project in. The sweat was pouring off my forehead as I turned to, so what about that kind of approach? No. I see you shaking your head right away. So, okay, yeah, I agree, because dialogue also isn't usually terribly efficient, right? And so I think prose, you don't need to get into little bits of dialogue. The passive voice is another one that we always hear about. And I know you and I joke because neither of us are really great grammar experts, but use of the passive voice is bad in admissions essays because you want to be the actor in things that are happening. So for those of you who are not grammar geeks, basically you could have, Jane read the novel in one day, or the novel was read by Jane in one day. Well, obviously the first version, Jane is the actor in that, kind of language. So avoid passive voice because it just takes you out of the equation and you want to be front and center.
I'm glad you explained that, Greg.
I figured you would be. What about repetition?
Yeah,
so,
repetition, I mean, is when you talk about repetition across different essays, I'm not sure that's particularly useful, because you want to sort of showcase your greatest sort of stories, and obviously there's very limited real estate, so repeating a story to answer a different question, that's not going to be effective at all. Now, if it's repetition in terms of, well, I included this on my resume, should I talk about it in my essays? Yeah, that's possible. Your resume, is a one or two lines at most, and if that's such a powerful experience that you want to address it in the essays, I think that's absolutely fair game. And recognize that your application should be sort of integrated. So, when I'm reading the resume and the data forms and the essays, I mean, they're from the same person, so there's going to be consistency across the different media that's essentially being used.
Yeah, and it's all going to be read at the same time by a reader. I also think, when we talk about repetition, principally here in this context, I'm thinking of like, should you write 2 essays for a single school that touch on the same project? And I would say probably not, because you're missing an opportunity. Yeah. I also would even argue that, when we talk about recommendation letters, it would be a little odd if the recommenders, your essay, and your data, if everything's only about one story, you start to look like a one-trick, pony, as we would say. So, avoid repetition to the extent that you can. What about, I've seen before people do inter-essay references, where they're sort of like, see essay 2 for details kind of thing. No, okay. A bit of a, it just... As an admissions reader, you don't want to jump around. Yeah. And in fact, the moment that you're making me do that, I get kind of ignored.
Don't make me do additional work.
Yeah. You don't want to bounce around. Now, there are some like what we would call taboo subjects for essays. what are they, and how do we navigate that?
I mean, they're typically money, politics, and religion. I mean, what you have to be cautious of. I mean, if we'll take politics for example, because that's the huge hot potato over the last several years. I mean, if you're passionate about one particular point of view, that's great, but you're running a risk by highlighting that, because the person reading your application might not be as passionate as you about that particular philosophy. So be very careful to make sure that your content works in a very agnostic fashion in that regard. Now, in terms of religion, that's quite interesting, because you don't want to be sort of preaching your ideology to your reader, but there's no doubt folks have done some terrific service sort of work related to their sort of religious affiliation or whatever it is, right?
Sure.
And we see the classic case of folks going on missionary work, and that can actually be terrific material for a candidate to address in the application. So it's a little bit nuanced, but more typically, you want to avoid the topics that might not resonate directly with the particular reader.
Yeah, and when you think about politics, for example, I don't have a problem if someone works on a political campaign or is doing, but focus on the work. It doesn't have to be about what you think about a specific policy, because could be really valuable teamwork, leadership, any kind of skill that you might want to showcase. And money, I think, again, remember that your readers they're not making a ton of money.
Right.
They're usually, they've chosen a career in higher ed that's maybe not a kind of super moneyed kind of pathway, right? Yeah. It's not. And so I think you just have to be careful about that. And I do think that there is somewhat of a stereotype around, this person wants to get an MBA so they can make a lot of money. And you don't really want to make money the focus of your essays at all. So just be,
I think that's a fair point. Investment bank, I can't believe what money they're making these days. So you don't want to make that the center of your reason why you want to become an investment banker, but you want to become an investment banker because, obviously that maybe it's a pathway to private equity, or maybe it's something you're particularly passionate about, to learn that because you want to do some other stuff in asset, whatever it might be, right? So, but not about the paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to the religion thing, I could not agree more. If someone goes on a mission, lives 2 years in a foreign country, doing all kinds of community service, that could be the hallmark piece in their candidacy, as long as they're not preaching their religion. It's a fine line, but there's a way to talk about it. Absolutely. Yeah. I guess one thing I want to underline, we sort of touched on this, but you're not writing a suspense novel. No. This is, you got to answer the questions as we talk about in the first lesson about essays, right? You answer the question, but it doesn't have to be,
I think the most important paragraph of any essay is the first paragraph.
Yeah.
If you've not hooked me then, you're a long slog to convince me in the second and third paragraph.
Yeah, and I can recall a conversation I had with a director of admission many years ago, where I asked, I was like, what are you expecting in terms of the writing skill? Because a lot of these folks they're working with numbers, they're business people, they didn't study English literature or writing as an undergraduate. And the person said, well, they're not applying to a creative writing program, they're applying to business school. Yeah. And so we expect them to be able to answer the question. We don't want bullet points. We want it to be writing. We ask for an essay, not a slideshow or something. But there's not this expectation that you're Hemingway or some amazing, writer or something as you put this together. So, and then the last thing that I want to mention here is, and we talked about this in another lesson as well, is that you got to remember that your file might be the last one in a big stack of files being read. So keep that in mind when it comes to just being direct and not using too many of these, kind of no-nos in your essays. Like you got to be on topic.
Yeah, just make that as your default assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. So up next, we're going to talk about, again, essays, because essays are a big piece of this process. But the next essay lesson is going to be all about some of the most popular essay questions that you encounter.